So I was getting desperate, to be honest. And that's why I downloaded the app in the first place. You know how it goes. Too many lonely nights, too many frozen dinners, eaten in front of a blaring TV. I never thought much of it, really. Just another way to pass the time. Her name was Emily. She had one of those simple profiles. Loves long walks, old movies, and discovering hidden gems in the city. It was her photo that really caught my eye, though. Short auburn hair, a warm smile that lit up her whole face, and eyes that seemed to understand you even through the screen. I swiped right, and to my surprise, it was an instant match. We messaged back and forth for a few days. She seemed normal, delightful even. Her texts were quick, witty, and full of these charming quirks that made me smile. We finally agreed to meet at a little cafe downtown, a place I'd been meaning to try. The day came, and I arrived early, trying to calm my nerves. Emily walked in right on time, wearing a pale blue dress that matched her profile picture exactly. And I mean exactly. Her hair fell in the same perfect waves. Her smile was just as warm, and she even had the same gold necklace, a delicate heart pendant. But it was more than the outfit. She looked like a photograph brought to life, down to the exact tilt of her head. I brushed off the unease. People like to dress up, I told myself. People want to impress. We ordered coffee and talked. She asked about my job, my hobbies, and my childhood. Her smile never wavered. Her eyes never left mine. It felt flattering at first. Intense, but flattering. But an hour in, something gnawed at the edges of my mind. It wasn't just that her appearance hadn't shifted, not even a wrinkle of her dress. It was that she didn't move the way people do. No natural shifting in her chair, no scratching an itch, no fidgeting with her cup. Her posture stayed frozen, too perfect, like a mannequin with a mechanical mouth. "Are you okay?" I finally asked, laughing to cut the tension. Her smile widened, but her eyes stayed the same. "Of course," she said, and her voice had a hollow ring, like an echo that came from somewhere deeper. The date ended, and I told myself to shake off the weirdness. Maybe she was just nervous. Maybe I was overanalyzing. We agreed to meet again. The second date was at a small diner on the other side of town. Once again, she walked in at the exact moment we'd agreed upon. And once again, she looked the same. The pale blue dress, the gold heart necklace, the hair that never moved out of place. She laughed at my jokes, but never blinked at the right moments. Her hands rested on the table, unmoving, pale as bone. When I asked her about her family, she tilted her head and said, "I've always been just like this." "What do you mean?" I asked, leaning in. Her smile widened again. "Just like this." That night, sleep didn't come easily. Her face hovered in my mind, frozen and unchanging, like a doll someone had left on a shelf. A week passed, and she kept texting me. The same jokes, the same perfect lines. But now the charm felt off, rehearsed. Still, I couldn't shake her. Curiosity won over common sense. I agreed to a third date. This time, I chose a spot I knew well, my local bar. The bartender greeted me with a nod, and I felt safe there, surrounded by familiar faces. Emily walked in at the stroke of 8 p.m., as usual, and she was wearing the same pale blue dress, the exact same everything. I couldn't pretend anymore. "Why do you always look the same?" I asked, my voice cracking. Her eyes, wide and gleaming, caught the dim light in a way that made my skin crawl. "I don't change," she said, her voice soft. "I never change." The bar seemed to close in around me. People's laughter grew muffled, and the lights dimmed. I stumbled out, breathless, but she didn't follow. My phone buzzed with a text from her as I stood outside in the cold, trying to catch my breath. "You left too soon. Come back inside." I didn't. I went home, locked the doors, and tried to forget her. But Emily didn't let me. Her texts came day and night, always the same photo, the same smiling face. Until one night, she sent me a new one. It was of me, standing outside that bar, terrified, my face pale in the streetlight. Beneath it, she'd written, "I don't change, but you do." And then, the worst part. The doorbell rang. When I checked the peephole, she was standing there. Same dress, same smile, unchanged. I had never been a huge fan of dating apps, but after months of feeling lonely in my cramped apartment, I decided to give it a shot. My friends had all found love online, and I figured, why not? I downloaded the app and created a profile, my heart racing with a mix of excitement and anxiety. I swiped through the profiles, my thumb flicking across the screen, dismissing the usual suspects, the gym bros, the overly filtered selfies, the obligatory pet pictures. Just as I was about to give up, I came across a profile that stood out. His name was Jake. His photos were intriguing, dark and moody, with an intensity that drew me in. He had a mysterious smile, and his bio was cryptic, yet alluring. Looking for something real. Let's explore the shadows together. I felt a thrill of curiosity as I swiped right. Within minutes, we matched. I could hardly believe it. We exchanged messages, and Jake's replies were quick and engaging, filled with wit and a hint of something deeper. It felt like I was talking to someone who understood me, someone who shared my passion for the macabre. After a few days of chatting, we decided to meet in person. He suggested a quaint little coffee shop on the outskirts of town, a place I had never been before. My heart raced with anticipation as I got ready, the excitement bubbling within me. When I arrived, the shop was cozy and dimly lit, filled with the rich scent of coffee and pastries. I spotted Jake sitting in a corner, his dark figure contrasting against the warm glow of the cafe. He looked just like his photos, and I felt a flutter of nerves as I approached him. "Hey," I said, offering a shy smile. "Hey," he replied, his voice smooth and inviting. "I'm glad you made it." We chatted over coffee and I quickly warmed to him. His laughter was infectious, but there was something unsettling lurking beneath his charming exterior. He spoke of his interests, horror movies, urban exploration, and the fascination with the unknown. I found myself drawn in, captivated by his intensity. As the night wore on, Jake leaned in closer, his eyes glinting with an intensity that made my heart race. "You know, there's this haunted house nearby," he said, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "We should check it out." I hesitated, the thrill of the idea clashing with a sudden wave of caution. "Is it safe?" "Safe?" He laughed, a dark musical sound that sent chills down my spine. Where's the fun in that? It's all about pushing boundaries. Despite my better judgment, I found myself agreeing. The thrill of adventure coursed through me as we drove to the haunted house, the night air thick with tension. The house loomed ahead, a crumbling relic of the past, its windows dark like soulless eyes. "This place has a history," Jake said, his voice low as we stepped out of the car. "People say it's filled with the spirits of those who never left." "Great," I muttered, trying to mask my unease. "Just what I wanted to hear." As we approached the entrance, the door creaked open as if inviting us in. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Let's go," Jake urged, his eyes sparkling with excitement. We stepped inside, and the darkness enveloped us. The only sound was the creaking of the floorboards beneath our feet. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread creeping in, but it clung to me like a heavy fog. "Isn't it amazing?" Jake whispered, his voice echoing in the silence. "Yeah, amazing," I replied, forcing a smile. We wandered through the dimly lit rooms, Jake leading the way, his enthusiasm infectious. He pointed out old furniture and artifacts, sharing ghost stories that sent shivers down my spine. But as the night progressed, I began to notice something odd about him. His laughter seemed too loud, too manic, and the way he looked at the shadows, like they were old friends, made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it, but the unease continued to grow. In one of the rooms, we stumbled upon a dusty mirror. Jake stepped closer, his reflection staring back at him with an unsettling intensity. "You know," he said, his voice suddenly serious, "I've always believed that mirrors can trap souls." I laughed nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "That's just an old wives' tale." "Is it?" he replied, his gaze never leaving the mirror. "What if I told you I've been collecting souls for years?" My heart raced as I realized he wasn't joking. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. He turned to me, eyes dark and unyielding. "This place is a gateway, you know, a portal to another world." I stepped back, my instincts screaming at me to run. "Jake, this isn't funny." He laughed, but it was a hollow sound, devoid of warmth. "Oh, it's very real. I've felt their presence here. The spirits, they whisper to me." The weight of his words pressed down on me, and I felt trapped in a nightmare of my own making. "We should go," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Go? But we're just getting started," he exclaimed, the manic edge creeping back into his voice. "You wanted to explore the shadows, didn't you?" "I didn't mean like this," I shot back, anger mixed with fear. But he stepped forward, blocking my way. "You can't leave. Not yet." Panic surged through my veins as I realized he wasn't going to let me go. I could feel the walls closing in, the darkness wrapping around me like a shroud. "Jake, please, I need to get out of here." He smiled, but it was a twisted expression that sent chills down my spine. "You don't understand. You're part of this now." I turned to flee, but he grabbed my wrist, his grip like iron. "You're not going anywhere." In that moment, the air grew cold, and I felt a presence behind me, a whisper of something dark and malevolent. I could see it in the reflection of the mirror, shadows twisting and writhing, reaching for me. "Let me go!" I screamed, adrenaline surging as I yanked my arm free. I bolted toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. "Come back!" Jake shouted, his voice echoing in the empty halls. I stumbled out of the house, the cool night air hitting me like a wave of clarity. I ran to my car, fumbling for my keys, my hands shaking as I desperately tried to unlock the door. Just as I got the door open, I felt a presence behind me, a cold breath on my neck, and I turned to see Jake standing in the doorway, his face twisted in rage. "You can't escape me," he screamed, his voice reverberating through the night. In that moment, I knew I had to leave, had to escape this nightmare. I jumped into the car, heart racing, and slammed the door shut. I turned the key in the ignition and sped away, glancing back to see Jake standing in the driveway, a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky, his laughter echoing in the stillness. As I drove away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, but the terror remained. a chilling reminder of the darkness lurking just beneath the surface of the world. I vowed never to return to the dating apps, never to seek connection in the shadows again. But as I lay in bed that night, unable to shake the feeling of dread, I heard a faint whisper, a chilling reminder that some connections can never truly be severed. And somewhere in the dark, I could swear I felt his presence, waiting for the moment I'd let my guard down again. It started as a lighthearted joke among friends. Let's see how many people we can meet on Tinder this week. We were all single, bored, and desperately seeking a thrill in our mundane lives. My friends and I were sitting around my tiny living room, surrounded by empty pizza boxes and half-empty bottles of wine, when we decided to turn our dating app escapades into a competition. Little did I know, I would end up winning the game in the most horrifying way possible. I created a profile that was a mashup of all my interests: hiking, horror movies, and dogs. I was feeling pretty confident as I swiped right on a few profiles. Most of the guys were just as mundane as I expected. Boring bios about their jobs, pics of them flexing at the gym. But then I stumbled upon a profile that sent a shiver down my spine. His name was Mark. His photos were dark and moody, often showing him in the woods or standing ominously in front of an old, decrepit house. Looking for someone to explore the unknown with, his bio read, and there was something in his eyes that captivated me. I swiped right, and to my surprise, we matched almost instantly. Our conversation started off innocently enough, filled with witty banter and shared interests, but it quickly took a turn into the darker side of life. Mark shared his fascination with true crime and urban legends, and I found myself drawn into his world, the thrill of the unknown enticing me. The more we talked, the more I felt as though I was talking to someone who understood my darker inclinations. "Let's meet," he suggested, and my heart raced as I typed back, "Sure, where?" "How about we check out an abandoned asylum?" he replied, the message sending a thrill down my spine. My instinct screamed at me to back out, but the excitement of adventure won out. We agreed to meet at the asylum the following Saturday night, and I spent the days leading up to it in a whirlwind of nerves and anticipation. As the sun began to set on the day of our meeting, I drove to the outskirts of town, the oppressive darkness creeping in like a thick fog. When I arrived, the asylum loomed before me, a haunting silhouette against the night sky. I parked and stepped out of my car, feeling a chill run down my spine. There was an unsettling stillness in the air, and the faint sounds of crickets were drowned out by my racing heartbeat. I spotted Mark standing near the entrance, his figure clad in dark clothing, blending into the shadows. "You made it," he said, his voice low and inviting. "Yeah, I can't believe I actually agreed to this," I replied nervously, forcing a smile. He grinned, a glimmer of something wild in his eyes. "You're going to love it. This place has a history." As we stepped inside, the air turned cool and stale, the scent of mold and decay flooding my senses. The asylum was a labyrinth of crumbling walls and broken windows, each room telling a story of despair and abandonment. I felt my heart racing, a mix of fear and excitement coursing through me. "Let's start with the basement," Mark suggested, leading the way. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I asked, hesitation creeping into my voice. He turned to me, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "Don't you want to experience the real thrill? This place is filled with secrets." I swallowed hard, but followed him deeper into the asylum, the darkness enveloping us like a shroud. The basement was a maze of twisted metal and crumbling concrete, and I felt the walls closing in around me. As we descended further, the air grew thick with an unsettling energy. I could hear the sound of water dripping in the distance, echoing through the cold, damp space. "This is where they kept the patients," Mark whispered, his voice laced with excitement. "Patients?" I echoed, feeling a knot twist in my stomach. He nodded. "The ones who didn't make it. Some say their souls still linger here." I shivered, the weight of his words pressing down on me. That can't be real. "Come on, you're not scared, are you?" I forced a laugh, but it came out shaky. "No, of course not." We continued exploring the basement, and with each step, the atmosphere grew heavier. I felt a sense of dread creeping in, but Mark seemed to thrive in the darkness, his excitement palpable. "Let's check out the old operating room," he suggested, and I reluctantly agreed. As we entered the room, the stench of decay hit me like a wall. The remnants of old surgical tools lay scattered across the floor, and the walls were smeared with dark stains that I couldn't identify. "Isn't it incredible?" Mark asked, his voice filled with awe. "Yeah, incredible," I managed to say, though my stomach churned at the sight. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the building, and I jumped, heart racing. "What was that?" I gasped, panic rising within me. Mark turned to me, eyes wide with excitement. "It's probably just the wind, or maybe something else." "Stop it," I said, a nervous laugh escaping my lips. "You're scaring me." But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Mark's enthusiasm felt manic, and the way he looked around the room made my skin crawl. We decided to leave the operating room and head back upstairs, but as we retraced our steps, I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was as though the shadows were closing in, suffocating me in their embrace. I turned to Mark, but he was no longer looking at me. "Mark?" I called, my voice trembling. He was staring into the darkness, a look of fascination on his face. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" I asked, anxiety bubbling within me. He didn't respond, stepping deeper into the shadows. "Mark, wait!" I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. But he vanished into the darkness, and my heart raced as I felt the walls closing in around me. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move forward. "Mark, this isn't funny." I could feel a presence behind me, a chilling sensation creeping up my spine. I turned to look, but it was just darkness, thick and suffocating. "Mark," I yelled again, panic rising within me. Just then, I heard it, a low, guttural growl that echoed through the hall. My blood ran cold, and I turned to run, adrenaline surging through my veins. I stumbled back through the corridors, desperately searching for a way out. As I ran, I could hear footsteps behind me, echoing in the darkness. I felt the shadows closing in, suffocating me as I sprinted toward the exit. I could see the faint light of the door in the distance, but the growling grew louder, more menacing. I burst through the door, slamming it behind me, gasping for breath as I leaned against it. I looked back, expecting to see Mark, but he hadn't followed me. "Mark!" I shouted, fear gripping my heart. There was no response, only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to leave. As I turned to run, I felt a hand grip my shoulder. I spun around, ready to fight, but it was just Mark, his eyes wide and wild. "You didn't tell me you were scared." "What the hell, Mark? You scared me," I shouted, relief flooding my body. He chuckled, but there was a darkness behind his eyes that sent chills down my spine. "I told you this place was special. You just have to embrace it." Before I could respond, the growling returned, louder and more menacing. Mark's expression shifted, a twisted grin spreading across his face. See? They want to play. Panic surged through me again as I realized he wasn't the same person I had met on the app. Something had changed in him, and I was standing at the threshold of a nightmare. "Mark, we need to go," I shouted, more desperate than ever. But he stepped closer, eyes gleaming with madness. "Why? This is just the beginning." I turned to run, my heart pounding as I sprinted toward my car, the shadows chasing after me. I could hear Mark's laughter echoing behind me, a haunting melody that sent chills through my body. As I reached my car, I fumbled for my keys, hands shaking uncontrollably. I jumped inside and locked the doors, breathing heavily as I glanced in the rearview mirror. Mark stood in the distance, his figure dark against the backdrop of the asylum, a twisted smile plastered on his face. I started the engine and sped away, the weight of his gaze burning into my skin. I drove straight home, my heart racing as I replayed the night in my mind. The thrill of adventure had transformed into a horrifying reality, and I knew I would never look at dating apps the same way again. But as I lay in bed that night, the darkness creeping in, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark was still watching me, lurking in the shadows, ready to pull me back into his twisted world. And in the silence of my room, I heard it, a faint whisper that sent chills down my spine, echoing in the darkness. This is just the beginning. I had always considered myself a rational person, one who scoffed at the supernatural and dismissed urban legends as nothing more than fanciful tales. But when I stumbled upon a dating app called Sprit, my curiosity piqued. The premise was absurd: match with ghostly entities seeking companionship. It was meant to be a joke, a way to lighten the mood at parties. But something about it intrigued me. I couldn't resist the urge to download the app and create a profile, half expecting it to be a prank. After a few minutes of filling out the necessary details, I was greeted with a list of potential matches. Most were cliché: haunted basement and the ghost of a jilted lover. But then one profile caught my eye: the Watcher. The bio read, "I observe from the shadows, waiting for someone who isn't afraid to confront the darkness." A chill ran down my spine, but I felt oddly drawn in. The photo was just a dark silhouette against a backdrop of swirling fog. I swiped right, heart racing with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Minutes later, a notification pinged. "It's a match." I read the message, and my heart raced. I was chatting with a ghost. "Are you afraid of the dark?" came the first message, accompanied by the ominous image of an empty room. "Not really," I typed back, trying to keep my tone light. "I've always been more scared of the living." The Watcher replied with a series of ghost emojis and a laugh that sent chills through me. "Then you'll fit right in. Shall we meet tonight?" My rational mind screamed at me to close the app, but the thrill of the unknown seduced me. "Sure," I typed, my heart pounding. "Where?" "Meet me at the old cemetery at midnight. I'll be waiting in the shadows." As the clock approached midnight, I felt a mix of excitement and dread. What was I thinking? But I couldn't turn back now. I drove to the cemetery, the moon hanging high in the sky, casting eerie shadows over the gravestones. When I arrived, the air was thick with an unsettling stillness. I stepped out of my car, and my breath caught in my throat as I felt a chill run down my spine. The cemetery was bathed in moonlight, the shadows stretching and bending in unnatural ways. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Right here," came a whisper from the darkness, and I turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows. The Watcher stood before me, cloaked in a tattered black robe that obscured his features. My heart raced as I took a step back, a mix of fear and fascination flooding my senses. "You came," he said, his voice low and melodic, like a haunting melody carried by the wind. Yeah, I stammered, trying to regain my composure. "You're real?" "Real enough," he replied, stepping closer. "But I am not like you. I exist between worlds." 2. The Watcher's presence was both captivating and terrifying, and I felt an inexplicable urge to learn more about him. "What do you mean, between worlds?" I asked, my curiosity overpowering my instincts. "I observe the living," he said, his voice echoing in the stillness. "I watch their lives unfold, their joys and sorrows, but I can never truly connect." I felt a pang of sympathy for him, a ghost trapped in a limbo between life and death. "That sounds lonely," I said softly. "Loneliness is a state of being," he replied, his gaze piercing through the darkness. "But I can offer you something more, an experience that transcends reality." "What kind of experience?" I asked, a mix of intrigue and apprehension coursing through me. "The kind that reveals the truth behind the veil," he said, his voice growing more intense. "You'll see the world as I do, and perhaps you'll understand the darkness that lurks beneath the surface." I hesitated, my heart pounding. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." "Ready or not, the darkness is always present," he said, reaching out a skeletal hand. "It's your choice to embrace it." Against my better judgment, I took his hand. A jolt of energy surged through me, and the world around me shifted. The cemetery faded away, replaced by a swirling void of shadows and whispers. I felt weightless, as if I were floating between dimensions. "Welcome to my realm," he said, his voice echoing around me. "Here, you will witness the truth." Suddenly, images flashed before my eyes, visions of people trapped in their own darkness, consumed by their fears and regrets. I saw a woman weeping over a lost love, a child crying for a mother who would never return, and a man driven mad by the secrets he kept. "Why are you showing me this?" I gasped, the weight of their pain pressing down on me. "Because you need to understand," he replied, his voice echoing in the void. "The living are often blind to their own darkness. They ignore the shadows that linger just out of sight." As I watched the visions unfold, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. The darkness was palpable, a living entity that thrived on fear and despair. I tried to pull away, but the Watcher's grip tightened around my hand. "Don't resist," he said, his voice low and commanding. "You must confront your own darkness." 3. Terror surged through me as I felt the shadows closing in, suffocating me with their weight. "Let me go," I screamed, panic rising in my chest. "Only if you confront the truth," he replied, his voice echoing like a distant thunderclap. "What do you fear the most?" I gasped, memories flooding my mind. I had spent my life running from my fears: fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of the unknown. "I'm afraid of being alone," I admitted, tears streaming down my face. "Then you understand," he said, his voice softening. "The darkness feeds on that fear. It consumes those who refuse to face it." I felt a surge of energy as the shadows began to dissipate, revealing fragments of my life, moments of joy and heartbreak, laughter and sorrow. But the darkness lingered, always waiting just beneath the surface. In that moment, I realized the truth. I couldn't escape my fears, no matter how hard I tried. They were a part of me, woven into the fabric of my existence. As the void began to fade, I found myself back in the cemetery, the moonlight shining down on me. The Watcher stood before me, his expression unreadable. "You've faced your darkness and emerged stronger," he said. "But remember, it will always be a part of you." I nodded, feeling a sense of clarity wash over me. "Thank you for showing me," I said, my voice steady. "You are welcome," he replied, his smile enigmatic. "But know this, the darkness is never truly gone. It waits for you to let your guard down." As I turned to leave, I felt a chill run down my spine, a reminder of the shadows lurking just beyond the light. I drove home, my heart racing, but I no longer felt alone. The darkness was a companion now, a reminder of the battles I had fought and the strength I had gained. But as I lay in bed that night, I heard a faint whisper, echoing in the silence. "You can't escape me." The shadows danced in the corners of my room, and in that moment, I knew I had opened a door that could never be closed. The Watcher would always be there, watching from the shadows, waiting for the moment I would need him again. I'd been single for way too long, so when Mark and I matched on the app, I was relieved. His profile was full of easy confidence, hiking photos, a picture of him in front of a cozy cabin, and one of those smiles that made you want to trust him. His messages were charming but grounded, none of the usual red flags. We agreed to meet for dinner at a new Italian place that had just opened downtown. I arrived early, my nerves jangling, but as soon as Mark walked in, my anxiety faded. He had this relaxed, almost magnetic energy, and when he laughed, it was genuine, warm. We dove into conversation right away. He made me feel interesting, like every story I told was the best thing he'd ever heard. It was intoxicating. The waiter came, and we ordered wine and pasta. The restaurant was lively, full of the comforting buzz of chatter and clinking glasses. As the night went on, I found myself sinking into the rhythm of it. I almost didn't notice how long we'd been talking until I glanced at my watch. It was nearly midnight. I frowned. "Wow, I didn't realize it was so late," I said. "We've been here for hours." Mark's expression didn't change. He sipped his wine and smiled. "Time flies, right?" I laughed, but unease prickled at my spine. The restaurant was still full. People were still eating, waiters still bustling around. But that didn't make sense. How could it still be so busy, this late on a weeknight? I shifted in my seat, the atmosphere suddenly too heavy. "Maybe we should wrap this up," I suggested. "I have work tomorrow." Mark didn't move. He tilted his head, his eyes locking onto mine. "What if we stayed just a little longer?" His voice was gentle, almost hypnotic. I opened my mouth to argue, but found myself nodding instead. "Sure, a little longer," I agreed, though I couldn't say why. My body felt heavy, as if the chair were pulling me down, trapping me in place. I tried to look around, to get my bearings, but the more I observed, the more I realized that something was off. The couple at the next table hadn't touched their food in hours. The man near the window had his fork halfway to his mouth, frozen in that pose, as if time had stopped mid-bite. When I turned back to Mark, he was watching me, his smile widening. "Isn't it wonderful?" he asked, leaning in. "We could stay here forever." My heart started to race. I gripped the table, desperate to get up, but my legs wouldn't respond. It felt as though they'd gone numb, fused to the seat. I tried to scream, but the sound came out strangled, like my voice had been swallowed by the noise of the restaurant. "Mark," I choked out, "what's happening?" He reached across the table and gently placed his hand over mine. His touch felt cold, inhuman. "This place isn't like other places," he explained softly. "It exists outside of time. Once you're here, you don't leave." "No," I whispered, panic clawing at my chest. "I don't want to stay." Mark sighed, and for the first time, his smile faltered. "It's always hard at first," he said, "but you'll get used to it. You'll love it, just like the others do." I looked around wildly, and that's when I saw it. The waiter, who had been passing by with a tray of food, had turned to stare at me. His eyes were empty, hollow, his face locked in a grin that mirrored Mark's. All the other diners had the same expression. Their laughter, their conversations, had become a loop, repeating phrases over and over like a broken record. I forced my mouth to move. "I don't belong here. Please, let me go." Mark's grip on my hand tightened, his smile returning. "You agreed to stay a little longer, remember?" The weight pressing down on me grew unbearable. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I swore I could see something lurking behind Mark, a shadowy presence that wrapped itself around him, feeding on the room's energy. My pulse pounded, and I fought to stay conscious, to fight back. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the pressure lifted. I found myself gasping for air, my senses returning in a rush. The restaurant had gone quiet. Mark was still there, but his smile had vanished. His eyes darkened, filled with something ancient and hungry. He leaned back, finally releasing my hand. "Fine," he said, his voice a low, disappointed murmur. "You can leave. For now." Before I could process what was happening, the world around me shifted. The restaurant lights flickered, and then I was standing outside, on the empty sidewalk, my phone buzzing with notifications. Hours had passed. My legs were shaky, my heart still racing, but I was free. The next day, I deleted the app, but Mark wasn't so easy to forget. Late at night, when everything's quiet, I sometimes hear the clinking of wine glasses, the echo of his voice, and every so often, I catch myself thinking about that restaurant, wondering if I'd been lucky, or if I'd only escaped by agreeing to come back someday. I never thought I'd resort to a dating app to find someone. I had always been skeptical about the whole thing, swiping left and right, judging people based on a few pictures and a short bio seemed shallow to me. But after my long-term relationship ended in a messy breakup, I found myself sitting alone in my dimly lit apartment, scrolling through the profiles on Eerie Encounters, a dating app that catered specifically to those with a taste for the macabre. It started as a joke among my friends, a way to poke fun at my current state of loneliness. "You're into horror movies and ghost stories," they said. "Why not find a date who shares your interests?" I rolled my eyes at the idea, but curiosity got the better of me. I created a profile, half-heartedly trying to make it sound intriguing. Looking for someone who enjoys the dark side of life, horror movies, graveyard picnics, and ghost hunting. I added a few of my favorite horror film references and hit submit. To my surprise, I received messages almost immediately. Most were from people who were just as strange as I was, sharing their love for the macabre. But one message stood out. "I know where the shadows hide." Intrigued, I clicked on the profile. The user, who went by the name Evelyn, had a profile picture that was both captivating and unsettling. A woman with long, dark hair, cascading over her shoulders, her eyes deep and mysterious. Her bio read, "I'm a believer in the unseen. Let's explore the darkness together." My heart raced as I typed back. "What do you mean by the unseen?" Evelyn's response was quick. I can show you things you won't believe. Meet me at the old chapel on Elm Street tonight at midnight. A thrill ran through me. I knew the chapel well. It was rumored to be haunted, a relic of a time long forgotten. I felt a mix of excitement and dread, but the idea of exploring the unknown with someone who shared my interests was too tempting to resist. When the clock struck midnight, I found myself standing in front of the chapel, its Gothic architecture looming ominously against the night sky. The air was thick with anticipation as I pushed the creaky door open, stepping inside. The darkness enveloped me, the faint scent of mildew and decay filling my nostrils. "Evelyn?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty space. "Right here," she replied, her voice a soft whisper that sent shivers down my spine. I turned to see her standing in the shadows, her silhouette framed by the faint moonlight filtering through the stained glass windows. "You came," she said, a smile playing on her lips. "Of course," I replied, trying to mask the unease creeping in. "What did you want to show me?" Evelyn stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "There's something here, something the living can't see." She gestured around the chapel, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows on the walls. "This place is filled with spirits, trapped between worlds, waiting for someone to set them free." I felt a thrill of fear mixed with exhilaration. "How do you know that?" "I can feel them," she replied, her voice low and mesmerizing. "They whisper to me, sharing their stories. I've been coming here for years, trying to help them move on." "Help them?" I echoed, skepticism creeping in. "What do you mean?" She took my hand, her grip cold but comforting. "Let me show you." Before I could respond, she led me deeper into the chapel, the air growing colder around us. The flickering candles cast ghostly shadows on the walls, creating a surreal atmosphere. I could feel the energy shifting, a palpable tension in the air. As we reached the altar, Evelyn closed her eyes and began to chant softly, her voice barely above a whisper. I watched in awe, feeling a strange pull as the shadows danced around us. Suddenly, the temperature dropped even further, and I felt a presence behind me. "Do you feel that?" I asked, my heart racing. Evelyn nodded, her eyes still closed. "They're here." I turned, and my breath caught in my throat. A figure materialized from the shadows, a woman, her face twisted in anguish, her body translucent and ethereal. I stumbled back, fear gripping me. "What the hell is that?" Evelyn opened her eyes, a calm expression on her face. "It's okay. She just wants to be heard." The spirit reached out toward me, her fingers brushing against my skin, sending chills coursing through my body. "Help me," she whispered, her voice a haunting echo. I don't know how," I stammered, panic rising in my chest. Evelyn stepped forward, her voice steady. "You have to listen. Let her tell her story." I closed my eyes, focusing on the woman's presence. The air around me thickened, and suddenly I felt flooded with images, visions of a life filled with pain and loss, a tragic story that unfolded before me like a dark film reel. "She was betrayed," I whispered, my heart aching for the lost soul. Someone she loved left her behind. "Yes," Evelyn said, her voice soothing. "Now she's trapped, unable to move on." As I opened my eyes, I saw the spirit's expression shift from anguish to hope. "Free me," she pleaded, her voice a desperate wail. "Please," I said, my voice trembling. "How do I help you?" Evelyn stepped back, her eyes locked onto mine. You must let her go. Speak the words. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on me. You are free from your pain, I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. You can move on. Let go of the hurt. The spirit's face softened, and I felt a rush of energy as the shadows around us began to swirl violently. The temperature dropped even lower, and I could see the chapel walls tremble. Thank you, she whispered, her voice fading like a distant echo. With a final sorrowful glance, the spirit dissolved into a swirl of light, leaving behind an overwhelming sense of peace in her wake. I gasped, the air returning to normal as the oppressive weight lifted. Did it work? I asked, breathless and trembling. Evelyn smiled, her eyes sparkling with satisfaction. Yes, she's finally free. Wow, I breathed, still in shock. That was incredible. But as the excitement faded, unease crept back in. What happens now? I asked, my voice wavering. Evelyn's expression shifted, a darker undertone creeping into her gaze. Now, we wait for the next one. What do you mean? She stepped closer, her smile twisting into something unsettling. There are many spirits here, and they're drawn to the living. They need help, and you've proven yourself worthy. I don't want to be a medium, I stammered, taking a step back. But you already are, she said, her voice low and hypnotic. You felt her pain. You connected. You can help them all. Panic surged through me as I realized the truth. I had opened a door that could not be closed. The darkness of the chapel surrounded me, and I could hear faint whispers echoing in the shadows. They were beckoning, calling for help. No, I can't do this, I shouted, fear escalating. Evelyn's laughter filled the room, a chilling sound that reverberated through the darkness. You have no choice. They need you now, and you've tasted the power. I turned to run, but the shadows shifted, coiling around me like tendrils reaching for my soul. Let me go, I screamed, but Evelyn stood in my way, her expression dark and predatory. You can't escape your fate, she said, her voice echoing like a death knell. You're one of us now. As I fought against the darkness, I felt the spirits closing in, their whispers growing louder, drowning out my screams. The chapel warped around me, twisting into a nightmare of shadows and despair. And in that moment, I understood. I had opened Pandora's box, inviting the darkness into my life. The spirits would never let me go. They would haunt me, forever demanding my attention, forever tying me to the shadows. As the darkness swallowed me whole, I realized that I had become a vessel for the lost souls, a medium tethered to the abyss. And as Evelyn's laughter echoed in my ears, I knew I would never escape. The darkness would always be there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the moment I let my guard down again. The dating app was a last resort. After another relationship fizzled out, leaving me with nothing but stale memories and a collection of unread books on love, I decided to give the digital world a shot. I told myself I'd keep it casual, but then I matched with David. His profile was a blend of humor and intelligence, a science teacher with a love for photography and an obsession with old vinyl records. Our initial conversations felt natural, like old friends reconnecting. But something about his replies was just a touch off. I first noticed it when I told him about a hiking trip I'd taken years ago. It was so peaceful, I wrote. Just me, the mountains, and the stars. David's reply came almost instantly. The stars and the mountains, just you. The phrasing struck me as odd, like he'd rearranged my words and spit them back out. I chalked it up to a fluke and kept chatting. But it kept happening. Every time I messaged him, his responses would mirror my words in subtle, unsettling ways. When I joked about my love for horror movies, he replied, "Movies of horror, a love that's yours." Sometimes he'd repeat my exact sentences, like he couldn't think of anything new to say. "Are you okay?" I asked him once, jokingly, trying to brush off the weirdness. "Are you okay?" he replied. Not a beat missed. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I laughed, but it felt forced. Maybe he was just messing with me, I reasoned. Or maybe he was one of those overly dramatic types, the kind who thought being cryptic made him more attractive. Either way, I decided to meet him in person, if only to figure out if he was as bizarre as he seemed. We arranged to meet at a bookstore cafe, one of my favorite spots. I got there early, claiming a corner table near the window. The minutes crawled by, and just as I was about to give up, David walked in. He looked like his photos: sandy hair, wireframe glasses, a comfortable smile. But when he saw me, that smile wavered, like he wasn't sure it belonged on his face. He sat down, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. "Hey," I finally said, trying to break the ice. "It's good to finally meet you in person." David's smile twitched. "To meet you in person. Good. Finally," he echoed. I swallowed. His voice was smooth, pleasant even, but the repetition made my skin crawl. You really like to echo what I say, huh?" I forced a laugh, hoping he'd take the hint and snap out of it. He tilted his head, his expression softening. "Echo what you say? I do," he replied. But this time, his eyes had a distant, glassy look, like he was somewhere else entirely. Something about him felt hollow. We ordered coffee, and as we sipped, I tried to steer the conversation. "So, teaching science must be interesting," I ventured. His eyes flickered, and he nodded. "Interesting. Science teaching. Must be." I set my cup down, frustration bubbling up. "David, are you messing with me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, his hand reached out, brushing against mine, and his skin was ice cold. "Are you messing?" he whispered. "With me?" The cafe noise seemed to muffle, like we were sinking into silence. I pulled my hand away, my heartbeat thundering. "What's wrong with you?" I demanded. He leaned in, his face close to mine. For the first time, his expression cracked, revealing something raw and desperate beneath. "They never leave," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They echo. My thoughts, your thoughts, everyone's." "What?" I asked, not sure I'd heard him correctly. He blinked, and the glassiness returned to his eyes. The moment of humanity slipped away. "They echo," he said again. But now, his voice had flattened into that eerie monotone. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, stumbling back. The other patrons glanced my way, curious but unbothered. David didn't move. He just watched me, his mouth twitching into a parody of a smile. "I need to go," I mumbled, grabbing my bag. "Go need to," he echoed, his eyes wide, pleading. I practically ran out of the cafe. My heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that David's gaze was burning into the back of my neck. Once I got home, I deleted the app. I wanted nothing to do with whatever I'd stumbled into, but it didn't end there. That night, my phone buzzed. A new text from an unknown number. "The mountains and the stars. Just you." My hands shook as I stared at the screen. Then another text. "Echoes. Your thoughts. My thoughts. They never leave. My reflection in the phone screen seemed to ripple, and for a split second, my face changed. My eyes empty and glassy, my mouth repeating words I hadn't spoken yet. I dropped the phone, my heart in my throat. Somewhere in the darkness of my room, a voice whispered, mimicking my own. They never leave, it said. Never leave, never leave. I haven't touched a dating app since. Sometimes, though, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I hear it. That echo. My own voice, repeating in the void, telling me that whatever I'd met that day hadn't just let me go. It was still there, whispering back. I'd been swiping aimlessly on the dating app for a while, bored and half-hearted, when I saw it. A profile that made my thumb freeze mid-air. It was me, not someone who just looked like me. It was my exact profile photo. Me standing on the cliff at Black Ridge Beach, hair wild from the wind, wearing my favorite leather jacket. Even the little scar above my eyebrow was visible. My name, Olivia, was printed clearly beneath it, and the bio was word for word identical to the one I'd written. Traveler, coffee addict, and horror movie enthusiast. At first I laughed. It had to be a prank. One of my friends, bored and messing around. I swiped left, amused, ready to send a message to my best friend. But when I reopened the app a few minutes later, it popped up again. My own face, my own name. I swiped left harder, my humor fading, replaced by a cold sense of unease. I shut the app and tried to forget about it. But that night, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the app again, and there it was, my profile, still haunting the feed. This time, I swiped right. A match. Instantly. My heart thudded in my chest. A message pinged through almost immediately. Olivia. Funny meeting you here. I stared at the screen, my mouth dry. It felt like I was staring into a mirror that had just grinned back. I started to type, my hands shaking. Me. Who is this? The reply came so quickly, I knew whoever was on the other side had been waiting. Olivia, you know who I am? Don't pretend. I closed the app, tossing my phone onto the bed as though it had bitten me. I paced around my apartment, trying to rationalize it. Someone had stolen my photos, created a fake profile. It had to be that, right? But the feeling wouldn't leave me. That crawling sensation, like I was being watched, like the reflection in the mirror had blinked when I hadn't. The next morning, I woke up groggy and unsettled. My phone had new notifications, messages from myself. Olivia, you're making this difficult. Olivia, we need to meet. Olivia, Black Ridge Beach, tonight, sunset. I could barely breathe. My chest felt tight, like something cold had curled around my ribs. But it was the last message that made my hands shake so badly, I almost dropped the phone. Olivia, don't keep yourself waiting. I tried to shake it off, delete the app, move on, report the profile. But the words kept repeating in my mind. Black Ridge Beach, the place from my profile photo, the place I hadn't been to in months. And the unsettling thing was, the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the urge became. It was as if a part of me needed to go, like something in my own mind was pulling me toward that cliff. By sunset, I found myself standing on the rocky outcrop of Black Ridge Beach. The sky was washed in deep oranges and purples, the waves crashing below. The wind whipped at my hair, and the salt air burned my lungs. The spot was almost deserted. Almost. She stood there, waiting. My knees went weak. She looked just like me, but not quite. My hair, my eyes, my scar. But her skin was too pale, almost translucent, and her smile was wrong, too wide. Her eyes had an emptiness to them, a void that made my heart race with primal fear. "Olivia," she said, and it was like hearing my own voice played through an old broken speaker. "You made it." I couldn't speak. My mouth had gone dry. She tilted her head, her smile tightening. "I've been waiting a long time, you know. It's not easy being trapped in your shadow." "What are you?" I whispered. Her eyes flickered with something like amusement. "I'm what you left behind," she said. "Every choice you abandoned, every fear you buried, every piece of yourself you tried to forget. And now it's time to make room for me." She took a step closer. The cliffside felt too narrow, the air too thin. I stumbled back. My pulse was racing, my legs trembling. "Stay away," I managed to choke out. But she only smiled wider. "You don't get it, do you?" she said. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to be you." The wind howled, and for a second, I thought I was going to fall. But then she lunged, her icy hands grabbing my wrists, and everything went black. I woke up on the edge of the cliff, gasping, the taste of salt on my lips. The sun had set, and darkness had swallowed the beach. My head spun, and I stumbled to my feet, trying to piece together what had happened. But something felt wrong. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out with shaking hands. A notification. New match. And there it was, my photo, but with a new name beneath it. Olivia. "Funny meeting you here." My reflection in the phone's screen grinned back at me, and I realized with dawning horror that the emptiness in my eyes wasn't hers anymore. It was mine. After years of being single, I finally caved and downloaded a dating app called Love in the Shadows. The name intrigued me, as did the tagline, "Find your soulmate in the dark." It sounded like something out of a horror movie, so naturally, my friends dared me to give it a shot. "You'll probably find someone who shares your love for the macabre." They laughed, nudging me to swipe away. I created a profile, complete with a picture of me in a vintage horror movie t-shirt and a bio that read, "Love horror movies and the thrill of the unknown. Looking for someone to explore the dark corners of life with." With a mixture of trepidation and excitement, I started swiping. Most profiles were typical, people looking for casual relationships or one-night stands. But then I came across a profile that sent chills down my spine. Marcus, 32. Seeking someone who's not afraid of the dark. Let's uncover the secrets hidden beneath the surface. His photo was captivating but unsettling. A man with piercing blue eyes, a confident smirk, and an unsettling backdrop of fog enveloping a forest. I swiped right, and to my surprise, we matched almost instantly. "Let's meet," he messaged almost immediately, and my heart raced at the thought of it. "Where?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "How about the old theater downtown? They say it's haunted. Meet me there at 9 p.m. The thrill of the unknown made my pulse quicken. "Sounds good," I typed back, feeling a mix of excitement and dread. When I arrived at the theater, the neon lights flickered ominously against the backdrop of the night sky. I stepped inside, the smell of stale popcorn and dust lingering in the air. The place was nearly empty, the worn seats creaking beneath my weight as I took a seat near the front. My heart raced as I waited, the anticipation building. A few minutes later, Marcus walked in, his presence commanding and magnetic. He approached with a confident stride, his eyes locking onto mine. "You made it," he said, a charming smile spreading across his face. "Yeah," I replied, trying to suppress my nerves. "This place is interesting." "It's got character," he said, his voice smooth like honey. "But it's even better when you know its secrets." "What secrets?" I asked, intrigued, despite the unease creeping in. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They say the theater is haunted by a spirit who was wronged. She seeks revenge on those who disturb her resting place." I forced a laugh, trying to lighten the mood. "Sounds like the plot of a bad horror movie." "Or a great one," he replied, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Want to explore?" Before I could respond, he stood up, extending his hand toward me. I hesitated for a moment, but felt a thrill rush through me as I took his hand. Together, we ventured deeper into the theater, the air growing colder with each step. We found ourselves in the old projection room, filled with dusty equipment and cobwebs. "This is where it all began," Marcus said, his voice laced with excitement. The spirit was a projectionist who fell in love with an actress. When she rejected him, he lost his mind and took her life. I felt a chill run down my spine as he spoke. "And now her spirit haunts this place?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes," he replied, his eyes darkening. "But she doesn't just haunt the theater. She seeks out those who come here, searching for someone to share her pain." I swallowed hard, the atmosphere thickening with tension. "You believe in all this?" "Of course," he said, stepping closer. "You can feel it, can't you? The energy in the air, the whispers of the past." I nodded, despite the growing unease in my stomach. "Yeah, I guess I can." "Let's see if we can summon her," he said, a wild gleam in his eye. "Wait, what?" I exclaimed, panic rising in my chest. "I don't think that's a good idea." But he was already setting up an old projector, the whirring sound filling the room as he began to play a grainy film. "Just trust me," he said, his voice low. "This will be incredible." Images flickered on the screen, scenes of an old black and white film, a haunting love story that turned tragic. I felt a strange pull toward the screen, the atmosphere thickening as the sound of a woman's laughter echoed through the room. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the temperature plummeted. The laughter turned into a chilling wail, and I felt a cold breeze sweep through the room, sending shivers down my spine. "Marcus!" I shouted, fear gripping me. "What's happening?" He looked at me, eyes wide with excitement. "It's working! She's here!" The projector flickered, and the image on the screen began to change. The actress's face twisted in agony, her eyes pleading for help. I felt a surge of panic as the air around us grew heavy, the shadows stretching and coiling like tendrils reaching for us. "Turn it off!" I screamed, trying to pull away from the screen, but Marcus held me in place. "You have to see this." The wailing grew louder, echoing in my ears as I felt the coldness wrap around me. "You're not supposed to be here!" A voice screamed from the shadows, and I felt a presence brush against my skin, icy and malevolent. "Marcus, please," I begged, my heart racing. "This isn't safe." But he was lost in the moment, eyes locked on the screen. "She wants to be remembered, to be set free." Suddenly, the film cut to black, and the projector sputtered out, plunging us into darkness. I stumbled back, fear overwhelming me. "What did you do?" The shadows twisted and contorted, forming a dark figure in the corner of the room. I could barely make out the outline of a woman, her face twisted in rage, eyes glowing with a supernatural light. "You've disturbed my peace," she shrieked, her voice echoing through the room like nails on a chalkboard. I felt a surge of terror, the urge to flee overwhelming me. "We have to go," I shouted, but Marcus stood frozen, entranced by the apparition. "Stay with me," he called out, his voice filled with mania. "She just wants to talk." "No!" I screamed, panic clawing at my throat as I pushed past him, trying to escape the room. But the woman's icy grip caught my wrist, sending a jolt of fear through me. "You cannot leave," she howled, her voice reverberating through the walls. Desperation surged within me as I yanked my arm free and bolted back toward the main theater. I could hear Marcus calling out behind me, but I didn't stop. The shadows clawed at my heels, the presence of the spirit following closely. I burst through the theater doors, gasping for breath as I stumbled into the foyer. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and I could hear whispers echoing in the darkness. "Help us," they begged, a chorus of lost souls seeking salvation. I raced toward the exit, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as I reached for the door, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, spinning me around. It was Marcus, his expression wild and manic. "You can't leave," he shouted, eyes wide with a frenzied light. "She needs us." "Marcus, you're scaring me," I cried, trying to break free from his grip. But he tightened his hold, desperation etched on his face. "We can help her. We can be a part of something greater." Panic surged through me as I wrestled free, shoving past him and throwing the door open. I stumbled outside, gasping for air as I ran into the night, the cool breeze washing over me like a wave of relief. I didn't stop running until I was safely in my car, slamming the door shut and locking it. My heart raced as I glanced back at the theater, its windows dark and foreboding. As I drove away, I could still hear the whispers echoing in my mind, a haunting reminder of the darkness I had encountered. I vowed never to return to that place, or to trust the shadows again. But as I lay in bed that night, I felt a chill creep through my room, and I heard a faint whisper echoing in the silence. "We're still here." The darkness loomed just beyond the light, a chilling reminder that some encounters are not easily escaped, and the shadows always wait for their next victim. It had been a long week, and I was ready for a distraction. When Alex matched with me on the dating app, I felt a flicker of hope. His photos were warm and genuine, a crooked smile, eyes that crinkled at the corners, and a picture of him hiking some forest trail. His bio was simple, promising adventure and humor in equal measure. After a day of playful messages, he suggested we meet for drinks at a trendy new bar downtown. "I'll text you the address," he wrote. "It's kind of a hidden gem." The text came through with a location I didn't recognize. I plugged it into my GPS, and the directions led me to a part of town I rarely visited. Still, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to go. I parked on a quiet street lined with old brick buildings, most of which were boarded up or seemed abandoned. The address led me to a building with a blacked-out door and a dim, flickering neon sign that read "Open" in fractured letters. The place was practically hidden, wedged between a shuttered convenience store and an empty lot. I checked my phone. Alex had texted me, "I'm here, just inside." A cold prickle ran down my spine, but I forced myself to laugh it off. It was just nerves, I told myself. First dates could be intimidating. I pushed open the door, and the smell of stale beer and something metallic hit me. The interior was dimly lit, with shadows pooling in the corners. The bar itself looked ordinary enough, with mismatched chairs and a jukebox playing an old rock song. Except something felt off. It took me a moment to realize what it was. The people in the bar, scattered at tables and leaning over drinks, weren't moving. They sat, frozen in place, like statues. A man in a leather jacket had his hand halfway to his glass, his eyes fixed on something in the distance. A woman with bright red lipstick had her mouth open mid-laugh, but no sound came out. I took a step back, my stomach twisting with dread. That's when I saw Alex. He was sitting at the far end of the bar, his head bowed over a drink. I approached cautiously, my footsteps sounding too loud in the stillness. When I reached him, he didn't look up. "Alex?" I whispered, my voice echoing in the unnatural silence. Slowly he lifted his head. His eyes met mine, and I shivered. They were empty, like someone had snuffed out the light behind them. His mouth curved into a small, sad smile. "You shouldn't have come," he said. His voice was soft, tired, and filled with something that sounded like regret. I don't understand," I stammered, backing away. "What's happening?" Alex's gaze shifted, and he looked at the other patrons. "We're trapped," he said, his voice cracking. "All of us. The ones who found this place, who came in thinking it was just another bar. We can't leave." The blood drained from my face. I spun around, heading for the door. But when I reached it, the handle wouldn't budge. It felt cold, like it had been frozen solid. Panic clawed at my chest. I pounded on the door, desperate, but it didn't move. The music from the jukebox skipped, looping the same verse over and over. The shadows in the corners seemed to thicken, inching closer. "Help me!" I screamed, turning back to Alex. His head dropped again, as though he couldn't bear to watch. "I tried to warn you," he said, barely above a whisper. "But once the invitation is accepted, there's no way out." "No," I said, shaking my head. "There has to be a way. There has to be." I tried to grab my phone, but the screen was blank, no matter how many times I pressed the power button. The light bulbs overhead flickered, casting strange, warped shapes across the walls. The shadows twisted, almost as if they were laughing at my desperation. That's when the bartender moved. I hadn't noticed him before, but now he was there, standing behind the bar with a grin that made my skin crawl. His eyes were pitch black, bottomless, and his smile stretched too wide. He leaned forward, his voice a low, gravelly drawl. "Welcome," he said. "Stay a while." I stumbled back, my pulse racing. The frozen patrons seemed to shudder, their limbs twitching, as though waking from a long sleep. Their eyes, just as dark as the bartender's, turned to watch me. "Please," I begged, my voice breaking. "I didn't know." The bartender's smile grew. "Ignorance doesn't save you," he said. "Everyone who enters belongs to the bar." "No," I whispered, my back pressed against the door, my vision blurred with tears. "This can't be real." Alex lifted his gaze, sorrow written all over his face. "I'm so sorry," he murmured. The shadows crept closer, wrapping around my ankles like cold, inky tendrils. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was the bartender's smile, wide and unending. I don't know how long it's been. Hours, days, maybe even years. I sit at a table now, a drink in front of me, my hand half raised as though frozen in time. The jukebox plays that same looping verse, and new people come in every so often, their faces fresh with confusion and terror. I want to scream, to warn them, but I can't. All I can do is watch, trapped in this unlisted place, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to walk through the door.